Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I wanted to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. I wanted to talk about diegetic prose. Okay, all right. So, I follow Dungeons and Dragons incredibly closely, and that means I also follow, by extension, the tabletop role-playing game industry because, quite frankly, now the tabletop role-playing game industry, before they were a competitor, now they're a threat. Right. So Pathfinder has literally thousands of people under its banner who gave a two-word promise to end Dungeons and Dragons forever, right? So my normal research has kind of changed into this kind of sentinel position where I'm always kind of looking for what's going to try to destroy Dungeons and Dragons next, right? But what's interesting is I come across some great creators, and not all creators are dedicated to the destruction of Dungeons and Dragons. Mostly just OGL 1.0 creator champions are dedicated to that. The people who are dedicated to Dungeons and Dragons destruction are most likely found within that group. Not everyone within that group is dedicated to that, but I'm hyper aware, hyper alert for this right now, right? So, Sean Tompkins, he created Ironsworn. Absolutely brilliant tabletop role-playing game. Sean Tompkins, good guy. He got a little confused when when the whole Twitter thing broke out. Talked a lot of nonsense about going to Mastodon. He didn't go nowhere. He's on Twitter just like all this talk of, I'm going to leave D&D, I'm going to leave Twitter. It's all, here's the U.S. election, I'm going to go to Canada. It's bullcrap, right? It's just a whole bunch of bullcrap comes out of people's mouths, and they just spout nonsense, and half of it isn't real, right? So you gotta be aware of that. Like, these threats to leave D&D, Nerd Immersion, right? Oh, when the revolt was up, everything was like D&D be gone and rah 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 rah, right? And now he's just doing Keys from the Golden Vault coverage, like nothing ever happened, right? Just pure nonsense spouted out of his mouth, nothing real there, right? Sean Tompkins does. He recently tweeted essentially the CV, the resume of Kiana Shaw, and she is a tabletop role-playing game freelancer, pretty smart one, actually not pretty smart, like brilliant tabletop role-playing game designer, and she put forward an idea that was pretty transformative. And so her resume, so she does a post saying, hey, I'm looking for work in the tabletop role-playing game space. Does a nice tweet. It's just one tweet, says, this is what I do, this is what I'm good at, you can hire me if you need me, right? Like, real solid. And actually, this, I don't know if you've ever, applied for a job, but, when you do your resume, you can put in dozens of hours on, 2 pages of content. It's hard work, and it's challenging work, because you make a change, you're like, was that good, was that bad, right? But she has this great, resume, this one tweet resume, and saying, hey, hire me to do work on your tabletop role-playing game, right? And I see this through Sean Tompkins. I look at Kiana Shaw's resume, and it has 2 terms on it: mechanical lore. I love that. I love that language. But the one we're going to talk about today is diegetic prose, right? And I want to talk today about diegetic prose because it's incredibly important, right? So I keep telling you, Dungeons and Dragons, it's not a game. It is a tool to achieve human flourishing. That, in my opinion, is what it is. It was created by Dungeons and Dragons. It was created by Dungeons and Dragons creator Gary Gygax, and I think he disguised a tool for human flourishing as a game. And the reason why is he knew, he's like, this is the best way to run humanity going forward. Nobody would listen, right? And put it in some stupid thing that got peer reviewed. But if he put it in a game, people would play it, and they would carry it forward for centuries. And that's exactly what's happening right now, right? And I think there's these massive clues, and the term diegetic prose is a massive clue that Dungeons and Dragons was never intended as a game, right? And Kiana Shaw arrives there with her attempt to engage people with her as a tabletop role-playing game designer, right? So how do we get to so first of all, let me define the term diegetic prose, and then explain to you why it's so critically important in our understanding of Dungeons and Dragons, right? So first of all, what does diegetic mean? Well, it's an adjective, and it applies to music in movies. And you're like, wait, what? Yeah, exactly, right? So this woman is using a term that is only used, diegetic is only used in context to movie music, right? And she's using it to attract people to hire her as a tabletop role-playing game designer. And you're like, whoa, all of this is weird. What is happening now? Right? And you're not wrong. It is incredibly bizarre, right? So what is diegetic music? All right, so let's dig into this. What is diegetic music? Diegetic music is music in a movie that the characters in the movie can hear. It's really super important, okay? So let's get all the way there, all right? So let's talk about diegetic music, okay? Really, really fascinating. Diegetic music. The best example of diegetic music is Say Anything, the movie Say Anything with John Cusack, and he goes outside of his girlfriend. He's trying to get his girlfriend back, and he goes outside of her house. He parks his car next to her house. He gets outside of the car and he holds a boombox over his head and he plays In Your Eyes by Peter Gabriel. And the girl is in, like, on the second floor of this house, and she's just laying on her bed thinking, and she can hear this diegetic music. She can hear her character can hear the music, right? Now, this is a romantic comedy, right? It's a romantic comedy. And so in Say Anything, you could have played the same song, but non-diegetically, right? So that we, the viewer, can hear the music, right? And you're like, wait a second, and once you realize, right, that the stories we're telling as humans have, in film, have diegetic music and non-diegetic music, you're like, wait a second, there's something fundamentally different happening with human narrative. Human narrative is changing, right? And it changed with the big and the small screen, right? And there were powerful leaps forward in human narrative with the big and the small screen. Today, the big and the small screen, the book, and shamanic tales are all antiquated by what Gary Gygax did for human narrative. He created a completely new way to tell human stories. Specifically, in my humble opinion, what he did was he created a way where you could tell a story that could use analogy and abstract IRL modeling to directly improve the life of the person who is hearing the story and also engaging in the story, right? And so it's just layers and layers of analogy and meaning and philosophy and art, and just the way a chef would mix ingredients. The Dungeon Master, like no other narrative creator in the history of humanity, has this ability to begin layering meaning, philosophy, love, passion, narrative, all these narrative elements together in ways that fundamentally are like knife edge pointed at cutting through the armor that we wear and changing us fundamentally, helping us to learn, grow, and change, right? And so Kiana Shaw saying this term, diegetic prose, what she means is she's saying writing in the tabletop role-playing game world, right? Now, she's confused because, like a lot of people, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, hey, tabletop role-playing games can do the same thing as Dungeons and Dragons. That's completely wrong, and the reason why is all tabletop role-playing games are tabletop role-playing games, whereas Dungeons & Dragons, in my humble opinion, is the only tabletop role-playing game, is the only tabletop role-playing experience that has ever existed and still exists. Because no creators even understand what Gary was trying to accomplish, and that's why they can't accomplish it, right? Nobody can catch up to Gary Gygax because they don't even know what he did, right? Except me, right? Like, I know what he did, right? And now I have this, like this huge, like, obstacles to get over because he did it so well and he was so smart. I don't know if I'm as smart as Gary Gygax. We're going to find out, right? I'm building my own tabletop role-playing game as well, right? Which I've already done once, and I'm doing it again now for the second time, right? But this diegetic prose, this look, right, at this fundamental look at, let's look at a letter that was written by a character in Dungeons and Dragons, and as players, we're hearing that read by the Dungeon Master, but we're hearing it as the characters would hear it because it was written in the world, right? So the dungeon master is writing this writing that was written in the world, right? And it's this deeper layer of meaning, right? And this is my point. You don't see this in any other form of art. You don't really see this in board games or any. They stop thinking. There's like this. They're like, oh, the complexity's high enough. Let's stop, right? Whereas when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, the complexity just ramps and ramps and ramps and ramps, right? And there seems to be no ceiling, right? So I think there's something really fundamentally deep about this idea of diegetic prose, right? And Kiana Shaw is the first to bring it forward. She's confused. Like, tabletop role-playing games are never going to be able to accomplish what Dungeons & Dragons can accomplish. But she has this brilliant spark here where just thinking about diegetic prose takes us to the point where we realize, no, D&D really is different, right? There's something happening with it that doesn't happen anywhere else. And then you understand events like the 2023 Manic Panic. 2023 Manic Panic is an echo of the 2023 Satanic Panic, right? And you get this situation where you're like, this is so fundamentally different. And the reason there's a second group coming to destroy Dungeons & Dragons is they look at it, right, and they see a sphere, and they're like, there's something in that thing that I don't understand, right? And that's why people keep trying to destroy Dungeons & Dragons forever, because they fundamentally know it isn't what it appears to be. It isn't what it claims to be, in my humble opinion. Every word of what you just heard is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.